Good afternoon. Thank you for joining Read Tech for today's webinar, REMS and SPL, How to Comply with FDA Submission Requirements. Just a few logistics to go over before we get started today. This is a live recording, so everyone is muted, but feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar utilizing the chat box, or if you have any technical difficulties, you can also send me a message. We will be addressing the questions at the end of the webinar, and we will also be distributing the materials in the next few days as well. Today's presenters are Gary Sainer and David Wilson, both of Read Tech. Gary Sainer is a subject matter expert on pharmaceutical structured product and medical device unique device identification in reporting to global regulatory agencies. He has over 30 years of experience in software development, process management, and data administration, with the last 15 years focused on the life sciences industry. He serves as chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and on the advisory board of the medical devices group. David Wilson is a subject matter expert in the pharmaceutical industry, global health authorities, and structured product labeling. For the past decade, he has been assisting pharmaceutical companies to achieve compliance through innovative technologies. David is an expert on upcoming deadlines and expanded regulations. In today's webinar, we are going to be covering the following topics that you see on your screen: FDA REMS, an overview, the SPL initiative, SPL implementation plan, SPL REMS solution, and of course, questions and answers. For anything that we don't cover in today's webinar, you can visit the Read Tech Knowledge Center on our website. You'll see the navigation to reach the drug and biologic product submission section on your screen. You can also follow Read Tech on LinkedIn and Twitter for regular updates about upcoming deadlines. And with that, Gary, I will hand the presentation off to you to get started.
Well, thank you, Erin. David and I are pleased to have this opportunity to share some information about the risk evaluation mitigation strategies, so the REMS, and some of the updates that have taken place. We touched this topic a number of years ago, and it's now being resurfaced, and we'll find out the reason for this particular timing in a moment here, because there are some deadlines coming up at the end of this year that are very important. So before we get started into some of the coding and placing REMS into SPL, for those in the audience that are new to this topic, I'm just going to touch very quickly on REMS and lay a little bit of background and framework around our discussion today. I know those that have REMS or submitted REMS and have submitted plans to the FDA for review are probably very familiar with this content, so it's a little bit of a recap for you. But we're going to start with that and then talk about the reason that the FDA considered repackaging that information into a XML format using structured product labeling, SPL, and some of the advantages in that particular scenario. And then there's two particular topics that David will jump in then and give us some details about how it's a good plan to recommend and get started in creating REMS and SPL. And then we'll talk a little bit about how Read Tech can actually help you along that pathway. So with all that said, let's get started here. Again, a basic definition here from the FDA is good framework, but it's those drugs that have high risk and the benefits, are still outweighing the risk. So the FDA considers this, a product that should be commercially available, and yet because of those high risks connected with a particular product, they do want a plan, a strategy, if you will, of how to minimize those particular adverse events in other situations that might arise with these particular drugs that have this high risk connected to them. So there's various ways to put that plan in place, and we'll touch on those in a little bit. But you should know that there is a number of aspects of REMS. So we'll be talking about stakeholders, and those stakeholders are pretty much all those individuals that touch the product from manufacturing, the sponsor, through those distributors, prescribers, dispensers, those healthcare providers, and all the way to patients. So in some cases, the plan needs to touch each of those points along that supply chain. And the plan does put together a number of components. In some cases, it's required to be pretty in-depth and very specific and very restrictive. In other cases, it's much less restrictive, and it might be a med guide and some communication plans and that sort of thing. So they're a little bit on the light side as far as elements to ensure safety. Now, when we actually talk about the REMS materials, so we'll use that term in the later on in the discussion. REMS materials refers to that set of information that goes with the plan. So there might be a patient package insert or med guide. There might be letters out to associations and so on. And then there is this term that we come across, elements to assure safe use. So ETASU is a number, it's a broad category, but it includes a number of different type of elements to ensure that those stakeholders are educated, are aware of the requirements and the risk involved, and are participating in procedures. In some cases, it's a registry, it might be a training class. There's other types of ways to ensure this safe use is planned. Some REMS, the strategy includes an implementation system. So if you do have those elements, there needs to be a system to present that, to monitor it, to manage it, to make sure it's effective. And that can be various elements, might include website, call centers, and other type of databases and so on. And at the bottom of this list, there's something called supporting documents. Now, supporting documents would be those preparation materials that a manufacturer or sponsor would have in creating the REMS. It's background reference material. It's submitted to the FDA, and they obviously evaluate it, but it's not made public. It's not part of the public-facing documentation. So with all that as a background, those manufacturers that have REMS usually walk through a number of steps. First making sure that the product does in fact need to have a REMS. A manufacturer or sponsor can actually contact the FDA to inquire about this particular issue. The FDA does have a guidance document. REMS is REMS necessary, so that came out. You can do some evaluation to see if your particular product might be a candidate. The FDA actually determines and makes a final decision as to whether or not your product would need a REMS. And then the sponsor needs to author the REMS. There's a review, and then you launch the REMS. There's various stakeholders that get involved, and then there's periodic assessments. So it might be a 6-month, 12-month, or an annual basis. There is some requirements there that it has to be within certain time frames. And then as a result of that, there would be perhaps revisions or modifications. In some cases, a REMS can be retired and it's released. So it does not need to continue. So if things are looking good based on this evidence, it actually can come off the list. Now, there was a template that came out in 2017. This was a template that the FDA put together, and and it is basically a structure of how you document your REMS plan. And it was pretty much an earth or game changer to the particular topic. Prior to that, there was a lot of variation about how each of these REMS were documented, the detail that they went into, the information that they reported. There were some rough guidelines, but there was tons of variability. The FDA saw that and said, nah, I think we want to tighten this up. And they put this template together. And David and I were looking at some REMS just recently, and it appears as though everyone is following this template. So I'm going to assume that you are a little bit familiar with that. There's a link at the bottom left here where you can actually go and take a look at that. It's available as a Word document, so you can download that and start to author using this template. It looks like those that are actually involved in generating REMS make use of that. But at a very high level, there's administrative information, the REM goals and requirements, and then they dive into a tabular type of presentation about those individual requirements. So there's various placeholders and actors inside this particular template about what you need to fill in. There's a number of predefined headings and subheadings and values to pick from. Section 4 near the end there is the assessment timetable. So how often do you plan to update this? And is it 6 months, 9 months, and so on? And then there are these REMS materials, and they're actually standalone documents. So when it comes time for review, they are packaged typically as a PDF and referred to in the REMS document itself. But they describe all these surrounding support documents that really are the framework that supports the REMS and allows it to be effective. So there could be a number of different materials there, digital, paper, all kinds of website information and so on. Now, if we want to just kind of summarize the particular types of documents connected with the REMS, we have this REMS document, which is the plan itself, and typically that's authored in Word and then submitted in PDF. And it definitely submitted to the FDA. They publish that at a REMS at FDA website. And eventually, when that particular document is captured in SPL, we will see this on Daily Med. So I think David is going to talk a little bit more about that, but this has been a slow adopter by industry. I think as of today, 4 of the 62 REMS are actually published in a Daily Med. That will probably go up considerably near the end of this year, and then certainly into next year. Now, the REMS materials, those are those standalone documents, again, Word, PDF type of content. They're submitted, and they're also available on the FDA website. Now, they are referred to and coded in the SPL. We'll talk a little bit more about the SPL later, and linked, so you can actually follow a live link and open those up. So there's a package in the XML that has the basic narrative, the REMS document, and then live links out to these standalone documents. Now, the supporting documents down at the bottom there, they are, again, submitted to the FDA, but not made public or coded in the SPL. Let's take a look at some of the facts surrounding this. What's in scope? So many of the drugs could have a REMS connected to them. So NDA, ANDAs, BLAs, OTCs, not in scope, usually not that risky. So they would not be a candidate. And again, it's not all products, it's just those small segment of the full domain of drugs out there that need to be associated with the REMS. Now, we will talk about revisions. And that's a very small change. It might only be on an annual report sort of thing, but then there's modifications, a minor and a major modification. So again, you might have change be affected 0 to 30 days. If it's major, you'll have that prior approval supplement at PAS. And then you could have this fact that the REMS might be released and discontinued. And you have a time frame there of 3 years or thereafter that it's a candidate possibly for release if the program looks like it's being no longer needed. Now, David and I will use some terms. These are FDA terms, a single REMS and a shared REMS. So shared REMS would have multiple sponsors. Each one would have their own product, and yet it's the same composition. It's the same product that might have different names surrounded with it. It's connected with different manufacturers and different sponsors, but there is a combined REMS that would allow each of these manufacturers to get together and basically share the resources to put a common REMS in place. And when that particular scenario happens, then that would be referred to as a shared REMS. And down at the bottom there, FDA does use this elements to ensure safe use as a description. We here at RETEC use this description for those REMS that don't require elements to assure safe use. We call them basic. I don't think that's an FDA term, but we needed something to put those two categories in place. So we'll be using basic and ETASU type of descriptors. Now, just wanted to quickly show, this is a fresh update. I think I actually took this this morning and just get a last minute update. This is the REMS website that the FDA provides, REMS at FDA. A lot of good information. You can find all the information, download it. There's some spreadsheets there, and you can dive into shared REMS and the individual REMS. There's also something referred to as a dashboard. So if you follow this link, there's called a REMS public dashboard. That came out a couple of years ago. They still call it new there. But that is a dashboard of a lot of metrics and statistics about REMS. And you might find that pretty interesting, especially if you're connected with REMS. There's a lot of good information. I took a couple screenshots here, and on the next page, we'll have a look at some of them. But that, just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of good information. You can filter it and look at various aspects. Now, this particular graph shows in the red line there the total number of REMS. So as of today, we're at 62 active REMS, and that's combined, shared, and individuals. And then there's blue counts for each year that were approved REMS, so they were added to the mix, and then yellow counts there, or mustard color there, for those REMS that were deactivated and retired. So it's been kind of flat for the last couple of years, but if you go back more into history, you'll find that at one time there was I don't know, off the top of my head, I think it's like 157 or more type of REMS, and many of those were deactivated. So we're up to about the mid 60s, 62 this particular year for the total number of REMS. So again, that number, indicates that not all the many REMS that or products that are out there, 150,000 different drug products and so on. So this is just a small portion, those that are really risky. Now here's some other stats that we did assemble. Now I did a evaluation back in 2017. At that point there were 75 total REMS, and there's some breakdowns there. As of today, there's the 62, so it went down a little bit. But what I want to talk about is the composition of those REMS that are active. The shared REMS has gone up significantly. So back in 2017, there were only 6 of them. As of today, there's 17. So much higher rate of shared REMS. And there's a graph, again, borrowed this from the FDA website that talked about the number of shared REMS that have been activated over the last 5-10 years here. And that is pretty significant. 2019 actually had 5 additional shared REMS. So that looks like the FDA is identifying these products, and then there's a number of manufacturers and sponsors that would fall into that category. The other trend that I see is that the REMS that require more elements to assure safe use has going up. So back in 2017, only 42, now 58. So that percentage of the overall is definitely increasing. And again, here's an FDA graph of those SPLs that need ETA ASU, and that is pretty good rate, and that's pushing that number up. So if you do have REMS, just be aware that you might fall into this category. You may need to have elements to assure safe use, and depending on the market, depends who manufacturing these products, could go into a shared REMS. All right, just very quickly, flashback in time and take a look at some of the activities for the REMS and some of the activities at the FDA. There was early 2007, there was RMPs, and then there's these risk maps. But over the course of time, the FDA had this interest in changing the composition of REMS, and 2017 was a very busy year. They rolled out a number of documents, this template. They actually put out a draft REMS SPL guidance. 2021, so this is just last year, they provided this dashboard, updated it. So that has a lot of good statistics. What we want to talk a little bit more about is the SPL and this deadline at the end of this year. So I'm going to change the conversation a little bit. Up to this point, it was pretty much centered on the REMS document and how it's currently being managed and created and authored in Word and saved as PDF and submitted to the FDA for approval and then published. And we'll now see some of the reasons that the FDA has put into place a schedule and a timing to cut over to an electronic SPL version of that document that has some structure and other benefits. So first of all, those shortcomings, the PDF's not friendly for downstream and computer use. A lot of support systems and electronic health records need to have this information. Prescribers are definitely interested in wherever they touch those particular stakeholders, having that information available electronically and quickly and fresh. And there's a number of changes that actually happen with REMS over the course of time. So just having the most recent and accurate, readily available, not too convenient to do those things with PDF. On the other hand, the centers CDR, CBR, and CDR, CDR and CBR, they have certainly been experienced with SPL, and they know the electronic capture of that structured information, a lot easier to process it and use it, analyze it, to find it, search it. There's just a lot of advantages in having that structured content. So they made a big push to build a provision to capture this information in SPL. And those guidelines date back to 2017. So there's a guidance document that came out, a draft, and literally it was. Then we went into a black hole. So industry was waiting and waiting for a final guidance to come out that put the timeline into place for capturing this information in electronic. And 3 years there where nothing happened. Then in 2020 December, it looked like a pretty much like a late Christmas gift. December 28th. Lo and behold, here's this SPL final guidance that came out. And wow, so it was probably on a checklist of, got to do this in 2020. So the information about that final guidance, specified, how this would be captured in the SPL. There's supporting technical guidance about how you code it. One of the things that was noteworthy in this guidance is that it made use of one of the authorities given to FDA to require electronic submissions after a 2-year period once the final guidance is released. So the FDA does pull that off the shelf periodically and enforces that. And REMS is actually one of those situations. So this guidance came out in December 2020. And with the 2-year period where they can require industry follow this guidance, and for the most part, as you know, guidances are those documents are recommendations or the current thinking, and you'll read that in the preamble of a guidance document. So it doesn't really enforce conformance. Not like a regulation. So, a guidance is, you can object to that and offer alternatives. This particular REMS final guidance is not that way. It does have the authority to enforce that and require. So the implementation is to require the SPL REMS to be repackaged and captured into SPL for any new or modified REMS. So if you're stagnant, don't have a change, you can hold off, but or you can be proactive and go ahead and voluntarily cut over to SPL early. But any new and modified REMS would now need to use SPL as of the end of this year. So we're sitting down here in the bottom right, the start of that second phase, where it's now voluntary in this 2-year window is running, and now we're 8-9 months away from that particular deadline. So that is the reason that David and I and Aaron were thinking about what's a good timing to talk on this topic. Many customers would want to prepare their systems and learn about how you put SPL solution together, so that if they have an update on January 1st or even the 29th of December of this year, they would be able to submit that content in SPL. So take some time to put new procedures in place. So obviously you don't want to wait at the last minute.
And Gary, actually touching upon that, right? You had mentioned earlier there are 4 REMS that have been published to Daily Med in SPL. Looking at kind of that timeline, would you have anticipated more from your experience in supporting organizations with these types of initiatives, or would you expect it to be right around that and then seeing an influx near the timeline? Yeah,
so that's a good, and David, these new requirements that come out, there's a continuum. So there's some very early adopters that jump on board and they just are very aggressive in getting something in place. I think most of the crowd is procrastinators, and they're going to wait until they have to do something. So they, kind of push it off. And I think that's why we only see 4 currently published. Now, some of that crowd will, in the middle of this year, start to realize, hey, I really ought to get something in place and be prepared. So I think that's going to ramp up second quarter. Well, actually, maybe the second quarter and third quarter, and then there'll be those that just put it off at the last minute and literally week before they're going to try to do something and say, oh geez, we have a change now, I have to put this in SPL. So you've seen that, David. How many times have we had some customers come to us with a last minute drug listing, for example? Mm-hmm. So you see the continuum there as well, right? Yeah. So I think it's going to be the same. I think it's going to ramp up summer of this year, and then become a pretty hot activity in the fall, so that companies are prepared to submit SPL. Now, the things that they need to prepare for are some elements of SPL that are not actually in their narrative in their Word document. So what is going to be new when you cut over to the SPL? So there's some header information, and if you work with a SPL vendor and technical team, they're going to take care of that administration header information. There's something called data elements. So if you're familiar with the drug listing content, you are familiar with drug product data elements. There's only a few, but there are some that are reported and coded, very much like you have in your drug listing section of your drug labeling. And then the narrative, well, that's something that's already been authored, so that's not new. And that can vary, 1 to 28 pages on the average here. But it does have to be tagged into XML. So whatever means that you have to code that for your drug labeling and submit that electronically in SPL, that is one place that you could research and explore whether or not SPL is going to be used or available from that particular resource. And then there's the REMS participant summary and tables. These are going to be coded and they're new, but the content is embedded in a narrative. So they're kind of represented in a tagged structured format, and so that they can be searched and built upon. So that is new activity. The content there's something that you've been working with. And then there's no SPL impact for the REMS document, the REMS materials. So these additional information in PDF format are part of the package, and they need to be submitted in the very same folder, just like images were submitted as part of drug listing. But it does need to be packaged together, and there's live links so you can open it up and so on. So that is a quick review of the SPL implementation or the SPL requirements that are coming up. And before David gets started into the implementation plan, Aaron, I think you have a poll lined up. Why don't we do that right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gary. I'm going to go ahead and launch this first poll question now. And we are wondering, how involved have you been in SPL? So the choices that are available right there: I prepare my company's FDA SPL documents. I have knowledge, but am not directly involved. I am familiar with SPL, but not knowledgeable. And finally, I have no idea what SPL is. We did ask the question after we explained it a little bit, so that might not be a fair option. But definitely feel free to select it, because we want to get a good idea of what we're working with. And if you do have any general questions about SPL, we'd love to answer them for you as well. So looks like about 60% of the audience has voted. So I'm going to give it another 10 seconds or so, and then share the results on the screen. So yeah, okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll out now. and share these results. And Gary and David, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I did. As a panelist, I don't think I see them, what the actual results came in as, but you want to highlight anything that's significant?
I apologize about that. So we do have 38% prepare their company's FDA SPL data, and tied 38% are familiar with SPL but not knowledgeable, and then the other two options do have lower response rates.
Yeah, okay, so I kind of thought maybe that might be right. Okay, so that's interesting. David, did you have any comments before you get started here on?
Well, it looks like a good majority of us have attended other REDTech SPL related webinars to learn.
There you
So,
go. There you
but
go.
yeah, and actually, as we discuss and kind of move into, the SPL implementation plan for REMS, what you'll find is those of you who are looking to learn more about SPL, whether you are on like a PV team who's actually working on the REMS, or if you're on the SPL team that's anticipating, all right, time to start coding this information, right? It's not usually, the most success is coming from cross-functional teams we're seeing that are preparing on this together and not just kind of taking it as, all right, I'll do it all. But thanks for kind of leading this through. And I think that was really my main thought, was when looking at the poll there, it's a good mixed crowd. Now, really, we've broken this down into 5 primary steps. There are some sub-steps or thoughts to think within this, but typically we'll start kind of from bottom up, being ensuring that we're assembling that team all the way through to then submitting the information to the health authority or submitting to FDA. So right now we're looking at you have about little under almost 7 months to, if you haven't already started planning, you do still have some time. But if there's anything we always suggest here at REDTech, it's the more time you can allot to these types of activities, the better, right? Because just the core concept of assembling our team, making sure that we have the right experts on our end, making sure that we have the right folks at FDA that we're collaborating or communicating with, and then the right, either whether it's team members internally or members of a vendor's organization that are our experts in either side, whether it's REMS or SPL, and bringing them together, really trying to identify, right? We've seen scenarios now where Gary was explaining the documents, right? There have been, with technology today, there are ways to make things more efficient, right? Having some of these checklists or questionnaires that are part of the elements of to ensure safe use of these products that are part of the REMS are more electronic in nature, where it's immediately sending almost like a quiz or a questionnaire that was filled out, and then someone digitally signs it and it automatically sends that data. Well, do we have a PDF version of that for the SPL side, right? Things like that, and then ensuring that we're maintaining consistency of the documentation, right? So assembling that team to make sure we have the right people on both ends is very important.
David, I had a quick question for this team. Back when some of the pilots were done, I think one of the FDA's summary of the pilot included the fact that there was a number of people that had regulatory knowledge and knew the product inside and out, and then there were some other people that had the technical knowledge about how to build the XML and are familiar with, the coding and that sort of thing. And you actually need both of these together to be successful. So it's more than just one or the other. And many times the regulatory expert on this topic, and it might be a manager of the REMS, knows the plan extremely well, but may not be familiar with SPL. And my question is, you've talked to a number of clients, and do you find that in some cases those that are responsible for REMS are not the drug regulatory people, and that these are sometimes a little bit different domain of individuals?
Yeah, what we have been finding is that when you think of technical experts in XML, SPL, right, that are familiar with this are typically not the same that have the subject matter expertise in our REMS program, right? So what we're finding is it's usually members of the team who might be working with us to already prepare their electronic drug registrations and listing processes. Those team members are keeping that compliance date, December 28th date on their calendar, and then they're making sure, okay, hey, regulatory subject matter experts on the REMS side, let's get together, let's make sure we start gathering all the data we need, and in some cases even engaging your SPL XML vendor to assist in whether it's creating a file, testing it out, making sure everything looks right, and then some of them can just hold on to it until the deadline. Some of them, like the 4 that have been proactive, submit it through. We'll talk a little bit more about those ones too, because it's interesting when you look at the dates, how not all of them came within the last month or so. The first one was in 2016, back during the pilot. So it's interesting to see.
All right. Here's your next slide that you had as far as assembling the team. Now prepare the team.
Yeah, and actually in preparation for today, right? We had a lot of questions coming through. Do we have to do this? Right? So confirming, is there a REMS on the product, right? Is this required for you? And if you have a REMS strategy on a product, yeah, this is necessary. And then starting to review the guidance, the resources, what's out there, even looking at the DailyMed resources that we see there, reviewing that, right? Identifying what the requirements and the components are, but then also trying to establish almost like a line of ownership between those and the different team members, right? Making sure we're bringing it back together, and then also establishing beyond what the requirements and components are, how are we going to start creating it then? What's going to be our method to do this? Do we already have a software tool in place? Do we have a vendor that's prepared to do this? And then beyond just the preparing and the processing and the creating, also looking at this point, you could even think of submitting, but that'll be a whole other stage we get to later. So you're really ensuring that we understand all of it, because some of that, the components of the submission are part of the guidance resources and the requirements we see.
Yeah, so I think that solution, vendor, whether it be a tool or internal, somehow you have to create that document, which is going to be a brand new exercise. Make sure that is an element and part of your team, and then getting the training in place and matching up with the rest of your team. Okay.
Yeah, and you asked earlier, Gary, about in the last slide, well, who is it that's typically doing this, right? Well, that's where when we see these cross-functional teams, it varies, right? Sometimes it's the people who, those of us that are traditionally doing SPL, you might see ReadTech's webinar announcement come up and then say, oh, we need to start thinking about it. On the other hand, it might have been a professional in like pharmacovigilance that is managing the REMS that then sees, oh, wait, we have to do this. How do we do this? They start Googling, or they see a webinar pop up through LinkedIn, and then they go and start attending. And the main point is really ensuring that multiple members of the team are there and understanding how it's done, because sometimes it may be, hey, our existing method in doing this, we're going to be able to do it just perfectly fine. No worries. There could be a scenario where, well, it's something that we only have one REMS. We don't expect to be doing it as frequently. So is the method in which we're doing it today going to suffice, right? Is it worth it? Or should we look into a method of just saying, hey, find an outsourced vendor to do this, right? In many scenarios we've learned, there's a lot of consultants out there that might be even assisting with the REMS and the management of the process. So ensuring you have all the right people there. And then now we get to this third stage of beginning to author the REMS content. So, as Gary showed earlier, the different sections and so forth, right? A lot of the information is cross-referencing data that is in the drug listing file. So that set ID, that's part of the drug label listing for the product, collecting current data elements from the label listings as well. Some organizations that we work with have data management tools that either they've created internally, they have a vendor tool, or they might use ReadTech and the single source for drug products to manage that data and making that available then to ensure that we have all the right pieces and elements. But then over time, information may change, it may adjust, right? It's kind of the nature of the XML is whether it's the label listings or now REMS and SPL, it's a living file that has many versions over time until it's essentially wrapped up and deactivated or delisted, if you will, if a REMS is no longer required or if the product's no longer on the market. But yeah, so all those main components. And when we're looking at this process, right, the authoring and the creation is very much following an implementation guide that FDA has put in place. So when we're really looking at these, there are several scenarios where it can get tricky, it can get time consuming, right? If the supporting documents, if there are many multiple different documents, cross-referencing those, ensuring that they're nested properly within the XML can get tricky, right? And that's where the organizations that we work with, we try to suggest, hey, get to this as early as you can, and then as we start reviewing it with you, we can try to help make sense out of what's in the right place, what isn't. Making sure the mapping of this information to the different summary tables are accurate and that it's not pointing to the wrong place. But with everything, the FDA did give us some time to do this. But in our experience, these types of things, they evolve, right? Like I said, there's multiple versions and the ability to do that for a reason. And if something's not correct right away, it can be corrected.
Yeah, I think this is one of the challenges that the sponsors have is looking at this narrative content. And if it was well authored, these particular activities would have been, considered. But being able to capture them with the controlled vocabulary that the FDA has. So there's various elements here for the timing, what is the activity, who's the owner, and what's the requirement, and if there's any supporting document. So for each of these particular activities, being able to capture that information, a little bit of a challenge. What you go through a couple of them, I think you get the idea, but it's still something that needs to be worked through, and it doesn't happen real quickly. All right, so here's the next one. David, can you talk about this actually building SPL?
Yeah, the actual building, right? So whether we're building it ourselves with a tool we've created or our vendors helping us create this, being involved in as the content's being created, reviewing it, having a method to then view it and do quality review of the information created, right? For a lot of organizations who use an outsourced vendor like ReadTech to create some things, it could be simple because you're relying on the experts that have participated in the pilot process, who have been working in XML for over since the beginning, SPL XML since the beginning of FDA's requirements, and ensure knowing that the structure of the XML is going to be correct. Right, those are the types of things that having a vendor who's assisting with this can alleviate some of your headaches under the build process. But that being said, right, a lot of organizations use a tool to build this themselves. And like I'd mentioned earlier, the earlier you can get started on these aspects, the better, right? So that way you can start building a file, right? We know the implementation guides out there. Gary had already provided and showed us different samples. So you can start really creating the data in the XML without necessarily submitting it right away, right? So you can review it, build it, ensure everything's looking right, and then tweak as needed. So building the SPL isn't necessarily, we're saying, all right, it's built, and like a car, and now we can't go back and take the wheels off and start over. It's a constant kind of adjustment as you're building. And And once it is built, right, the beauty of XML and all this is there is that rendered view that we can view and see as a human, like Gary shows in the second version. For those of us that live in the matrix, if you will, like the coding above look like Gary, hey, that probably looks great to Gary. To me, I'd much rather look at the table below. But yes, it's ensuring that these style sheets and things can then allow a user to review. What we've done here at RETEC with a lot of our SPL preparation in the review of one version to the next, we have implemented industry best kind of proofreading tools. So TVT is what we utilize to ensure this. And what we've assisted organizations with is when they use a proofreading tool like that, we can help guide you to the right place, whether it's at with your proofreading company or tapping into the expertise of RETEC of showing you, okay, here are the best practices on how to do that. Make sure that you're proofing this properly, XML against XML, things like that, or even source document against what the XML is. So the building isn't just a matter of, okay, making sure it's built, it's also ensuring that what we're building is quality and going back and adjusting when needed. Now, we've built it, right? Time to start submitting our last step in the phase here, which hopefully we get this done before December 28th. Hopefully it's before the holidays. So you have plenty of time to really work through the back and forth of the build. But sometimes surprises can arise at the submit stage as well. So we definitely suggest, if I haven't already said it earlier, get started as early as you can. So when you get to stage 5, if you have to go back to stage 4 for any reason, you have ample time to do so, and things don't bleed into the 2023 calendar year, and you're compliant when needed. But yeah, submission method 1 is really for existing approved REMS. So you can advise the REMS website team at the email address you see there of your intent to submit SPL and REMS, and then you submit SPL and REMS as a standalone folder via the electronic submissions gateway to the Office of the Commissioner for e-listing. So this will actually then disseminate that data through all the various checks and balances at FDA within the ESG, gets the file to Daily Med. So that's another question we get a lot of times is, well, I submit my files for like whether it's drug listing purposes, but then I also contact Daily Med and I send them a file. Well, with this electronic submissions gateway process and the submitting of these XML, in many cases, some cases, there's confidential data, redacted version is being sent to Daily Med. So it's all part of that seamless flow of the data. Now, submission method 2, this is when we have new or modified REMS. So this is where, again, you'll notify the agency of your intent to submit REMS. Now, this is where we actually have REMS data that needs review, right? Whether it's it's brand new, or if we're modifying data, that is then going through an ECTD supplement via the electronic submissions gateway to either center that's reviewing this, and then negotiation commences if needed. And then again, continued along this path with that kind of new or modified. 14 days after approval, then you submit that final REMS in XML, again, through that same ECTD supplement. And then once everything's submitted and final, much like the drug listing process, we then submit that final SPL REMS through the ESG to the Office of the Commissioner. So it's similar to what the drug listing activities we do with SPL for the drug label listings with our approvals. And then third is shared REMS. We didn't talk too much on shared REMS. We were just pretty focused on talking REMS in general. But as Gary had mentioned earlier, these shared REMS are scenarios where there are multiple participants and multiple products in a single REMS program. So, the submission methods we mentioned above are a reference here. So whether it's new or an existing, right? But after collaboration, it's our understanding that each sponsor should be submitting SPL REMS shared files in separate ECTD submissions or standalone SPL packages. Content should be the same. We have actually seen some shared SPL files. So there's unique metadata for each of the companies, and there are existing examples now in DailyMed, those 4 examples where you can reference and see how some of this is being applied and done. But when it comes to the shared REMS, FDA will create our understanding is creating a SPL indexing file that identifies the drugs in the shared REMS, and then publishing that to DailyMed as part of that FDA REMS and the FDA REMS at FDA websites. So yeah, and then here's kind of how that flow of the data works and transmitted through from the sponsor to FDA to then ultimately the public, right? And healthcare providers and prescribers, right? The information's all starting at our sponsors, where the information then goes through to the agency through the National Library of Medicine and DailyMed, but also through that REMS at FDA. And ultimately the details and then those REMS websites that we'd go to access, whether it's those online questionnaires or online forms that we need to sign off on and so forth. But the concept and idea is much like DailyMed. It acts as a labeling repository for this data. It will also act as a repository for the REMS data as well. Yeah, and as we saw here, we had referenced and spoke about it earlier. There are 4 REMS SPL files active in DailyMed. There's one from 2016, one from 2018, I believe one from 2020, and then just one at the very beginning of this year in 2022.
I think it dropped off there, David.
Oh, sorry, Gary, I accidentally clicked the mute button. What I was mentioning is the last one we then saw was January 2021. Yeah. That's the most recent file. So yeah, there's been not versions, but there have been files submitted through kind of almost each year of this since the pilot, and now none yet in 2022, but we definitely anticipate that that number significantly increases when we see there's 62 of them that have to be performed.
Right.
Great. Okay, I'm going to jump right in with poll question number 2. And I did just want to address to the audience, we know that we are going over the hour mark and we do still have a bit of the presentation left. So we are just going to carry on for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so. If anyone has to drop off, we completely understand, and we will make sure that you receive a copy of the slides and the recorded presentation via email either this afternoon or later this week. So with that being said, I'm going to launch the second poll. How will you create your SPL documents? So the options that you should see on your screen: build software, buy software, use ReadTech as an external vendor, use a different external vendor, or create manual FDA submissions. So we'll give that a few more seconds, let everyone have some time to vote. And as always, we appreciate your participation in these polls. It definitely helps guide the rest of the presentation to make sure we're covering what you need to hear. Okay, it looks like about 60% of the audience voted, so we're going to give it just about 5 more seconds or so, and then I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Okay, so closing the poll now. And I will share for the audience, but Gary, it looks like we have 5% looking to buy software, 71% using ReadTech, which we love to hear, and 24% using a different external vendor. So with that, I will hand the presentation back off to you both.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Sample size might be a little biased there, but we're always glad to have those vendors listen or those sponsors work with us. David, let's do a quick wrap up here of a summary of what our solution is and how we can help.
Right. So those of you planning on utilizing ReadTech, or if you're still evaluating, looking for a method to do this, we try to make it as simple as possible, right? It starts with you have your information, you have your data. We provide a data collection form for the data elements of each of these XML files. And we go about the process of then training you on the elements and helping you better understand them, while then collaborating to bring all of that data together. Then here in the middle, under SPL REMS solution, ReadTech then begins the process of converting that data into the XML, communicating the information back to you, ensuring you can access it, view it, do the quality review you require in order to ensure everything looks accurate. And then from there, if it's part of that like new or updated REMS, you'd be including that into that ECTD submission. For organizations that use ReadTech for the actual drug listing submission through the gateway to the Office of the Commissioner, ReadTech can help support that and submit the data on your behalf. Or alternatively, if you're submitting that data already, you just simply submit it on through, and that's as simple as I can put it, right? We collaborate with you to ensure that you have the right data, all the right elements for what's required, and ensure it's packaged into the SPL properly.
So yeah, there's a lot of controlled vocabularies there in building a well-formed SPL and so on. But it is one of those things that we do quite a bit of a similar type of SPL preparation. So I think this is going to be a really good opportunity to support customers along those lines. David, you added some just sample image of some of the metadata that might be captured.
Yeah, and actually, Gary, you mentioned earlier, right, that the controlled vocabulary, right? Getting through this, especially the first go around, really helps those within an organization going through this. Like we're walking you through these data collection templates where controlled vocabularies are applied, helping you understand what they may be, right? Sometimes they're a little different than some of the terminology we may have previously used, and that's what we're here to do. We go through that implementation guide, we review the data, the control vocabularies, understand it, so then we can help our sponsors understand what data needs to go where.
Alrighty.
Yeah, this is showing us a sample of the data from the raw coding through then to the actual what it looks like in a rendered view. Yeah, and as far as next steps go, right, earlier you can get started, the better, right? It'll remove some of that potential of like panic mode when we get to the end of the year. So we like to think, plan ahead for end of year and holidays, and make your life easier by getting started a little earlier. And then, of course, we'll always keep our industry kind of abreast of what we learned from FDA. But if you are looking to get started earlier, please don't hesitate to contact us. That's what we're here for, is to assist. And really, we believe, and the clients we work with also believe that by assisting with this, it allows our clients to be a little more nimble, right? It's a cost-effective solution that'll help them save time with a vendor who's been assisting them for many submissions. It's minimally intrusive, right? So it allows you to focus on the REMS data and your information you have. We're flexible, right, through this kind of outsourced type model, and it really helps ensure that you have accurate and your submissions are on time with the subject matter expertise that we can apply and support you with.
It's a great, really good summary there of some of the benefits and how we can help. Aaron, I think you had one more poll before we close out here.
Okay, great. And I'd like to thank everyone for bearing with us while we did go over the time just a little bit. Almost everyone stayed on, so that was wonderful. And now we just have our last poll question. So when will you create REMS in SPL? Early in the voluntary phase, late in the voluntary phase, or when required? And I think that David and Gary did a good job of letting us know where ReadTech falls on this scale and what we think. So I'll give you just a few seconds to answer the question.
Yeah, the window's starting to close, as they say.
Yeah, we're losing that early in the voluntary phase. For sure. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. We'll share the results quickly with the audience.
Yeah, and Gary, you might not be able to see, but we have a 9% early in the voluntary phase. No one answered late in the voluntary phase, and a strong majority of everyone, 91%, when required. So it's, yeah, again, like we were mentioning earlier, what we see, right? There are early adopters to things, but for the most part, we find that if we don't have to do it quite yet, why should we do it? Now, engaging with your vendor or SPL vendor or your team to create this is a completely different topic, right? Getting the data prepared for submission to submit when it's required, then that's something that I completely understand. So
yeah,
great.
Right. Okay.
Okay, great. So thank you guys for that. And now we'll just move on to questions and answers. Like I said, we do recognize that we are over time, but we do still have a lot of folks on the line, so maybe we'll cover about 2 or 3 questions if that sounds good to you guys.
Sure.
Great. First audience question that we received today: is REMS information currently required to be included in drug product listings?
Well, I think we touched on that a little bit. David talked to it as well. That is not across the board, so it does not need to be included in the drug listing. This is actually a standalone, independent document that the FDA reviews and is now a candidate for moving into SPL. So yes, the information has some crossover. The identification of the product, the brand name, some strength information perhaps. But this is a standalone document independent of the listing SPL that you may have created in the past. David, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I see in like maybe in certain highlights of prescribing information, there might be a reference to REMS under warning and precautions. There's also typically like a reference to the REMS program where it shows, notable requirements of REMS include, a prescriber must certify by enrolling in the program. Prescribers must this, patients must that. So there are elements there. Let's see but for the most part, those seem to be the main aspect I'm seeing. And then also I think there's some in patient counseling information, it might include it. Now on the reverse end, the data that's going into the REMS SPL that's then referencing the drug listing, the actual set ID of the drug listing is being referenced. So I think I guess the answer could be yes, there is reference to information from both documents in each corresponding document from what we've seen.
Yeah, so you can link, well, certainly from the REMS document, link back to the source labeling document, but the standalone document, standalone review, independent review, and probably different timing of review, and content's quite different. Aaron, all right, so what's the next one there?
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to try to phrase this correctly. So does this new REMS in SPL requirement apply to drugs that already have had their REMS accepted by the FDA, or is it just for new REMS submissions moving forward? I hope I translated that correctly from what we received.
I think by attrition, they're going to eventually pick up all the REMS in the current inventory and have them in SPL. So if you go back to one of those metrics and graphs on the FDA website, you can actually take a look at the number of modifications over the course of time. And there's, about, let's say about 10, 15% of all REMS have a modification each year. So even though the requirement right now is for any new and change REMS, that will start to expand and include all the inventory of REMS. I haven't heard a requirement that says if you are lucky enough not to have a change for, like, say, 3 years, will you have to convert at some point in time? David, have you heard anything like that? I think they're going to see how it flows out and you know, just use the changed and new as the criteria for using SPL.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's where the submission options where it was showing the drug listing version, right? Something that's already been approved or we've changed and it wasn't an SPL. You do have the ability to submit it through and get it there and just notify that email address we were showing that we're going to manage this in SPL. And then you submit that data through, and then as changes are updated, you just continuously update the SPL. So we've heard of organizations, some of them clients we're working with are saying, okay, we're targeting the change and it would coincide with sometime near that December date. Let's get this going now. Others have said, hey, we're just going to get it in SPL, and then whenever we have a change or an update, we worry about it then. But this way, they've at least created the baseline. They have the SPL created, and then any updates or changes to that are just applied based on using that SPL as kind of the starting point.
Yeah, and I think those REMS, they might have changes to the documentation that would fall into this changed category. And then, whenever that evaluation and assessment occurs, so 3 years or 6 years or something, there's a really good possibility that there would be a change as a result of that timing, and then therefore that would trigger an SPL submission. Aaron, do you have one more, or are we going to call it?
Yeah, let's do one more because this is everyone's favorite, most asked question every time is a new requirement from the FDA. Which is, what are the fines and repercussions for not complying on time?
Well, David, you want to talk about misbranding?
Yeah. There's a lot out there from the perspective of when the SPL is incorrect or data is not accurate based on what has been approved, right? So the 14-day timeline after approval, if the data is not updated then in SPL, technically the data could be deemed as misbranded and mislabeled, which could lead to several issues. And put it this way, and lightly, I guess ReadTech and our clients were always trying to avoid that. Now, monetarily, I don't know. I don't think we've heard anything yet on are there any fines? What's in? I haven't heard anything on that end, right, Gary? Have you?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything on that. But some of these shared REMS, like the opioid shared REM, has a lot of visibility and a lot of press about that. So if there was something going awry and not being up to date, that could have impacts more than just from the FDA. That could put your company in bad light, in media. So the reputation might take a hit. So I certainly wouldn't recommend it, but we're not aware of any monetary fines, or we haven't heard of any company presidents going into jail as of yet.
Right.
Put it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, at last glance, I think the opioid analgesic shared REMS is like 60-something participant companies and dozens of products under it. So some of these shared REMS are huge. There's a lot there.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for all the answers, Gary and David. If we could just move to the next slide. This is the contact information for ReadTech. You can reach us at pharma@readtech.com, or of course our phone number right there. There's also a lot of information on our website, so be sure to check that out. And as David explained earlier, we are more than happy to answer your questions and also to help you with your actual submissions. So definitely feel free to reach out. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Gary and David, for the information. This was great.
Thank you.
All right, bye everybody.
Thank you.